Alrighty, that should about do it. Okay. Hello, 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 and welcome back to Storytime Saturdays. I'll be your narrator, Fraggeth. Today we're going to continue doing some more Stephen King short stories. I have somehow lost my bookmark, so I have to actually hunt these things down the hard way. Bear with me. Oh, sorry, cat. There we go. Much better. Ha! Yes. Much better. Huh? There we go. The cat is in a more comfortable position for him and me. We'll see how long that lasts. Okay, so the two I wanted to get to were Graveyard Shift and Trucks. Although Battleground is cute too. Yes, cat, I'm sure they can hear you. Purring and a puttering away. Purring and a puttering away. Oh, he wishes to be broadcast, it seems. Alright, none of these are super long. So we'll see if I can't get through all of them. Well, they're short stories, haha, so they should be kind of not super long, but whatever. Okay, let me get this bookmark in here. In fact, what I might do is do Battleground, Trucks, then Graveyard Shift to end on a really moribund note. Yeah. Okay, cat, you need to get away from the microphone, or else I'm going to keep bumping you with it. Of course, maybe you enjoy this. Maybe you enjoy this bumping of microphone. He just needs loving. He's old. He's getting on in years. All right, cat, settle down. All right, that should about do it. I've got the pages marked as I need them. So we're going to start with the, I guess you could call it lighthearted battleground, although people die. Um, they're not real people though, so they don't count. Ha! So there. Fictional murder is okay. That's what we say here on Fraggeth streams. If fictional people are dying, well, there can't really be a problem, can there? Unless they're in a one-to-one perfect simulation of the universe, then it does kind of matter. That's not okay. Killing them is not okay. But how do you determine that? Well, that is not my problem. Philosophizing, and pontificating. Those, however, are my problem. And reading these stories is also my problem. Or my treasure. Pleasure. Sorry. Whatever. Come on, cat, scoot your butt. Battleground by Stephen King. Mr. Renshaw? The desk clerk's voice caught him halfway to the elevator, and Renshaw turned back impatiently, shifting his flight bag from one hand to the other. The envelope in his coat pocket, stuffed with 20s and 50s, crackled heavily. The job had gone well, and the pay had been excellent. even after the organization's 15% finder's fee had been skimmed off the top. Now all he wanted was a hot shower and a gin and tonic and sleep. "What is it?" "Package, sir. Would you sign the slip?" Renshaw signed and looked thoughtfully at the rectangular package. His name and the building's address were written on the gummed label in a spiky backhand script that seemed familiar. He rocked the package on the imitation marble surface of the desk, and something clanked faintly inside. "Should I have that sent up, Mr. Renshaw?" "No, I've got it." It was about 18 inches on a side and fitted clumsily under his arm. He put it on the plush carpet that covered the elevator floor and twisted his key in the penthouse slot above the regular rack of buttons. The car rose smoothly and silently. He closed his eyes and let the job replay itself on the dark screen of his mind. First, as always, a call from Cal Bates. "You available, Johnny?" He was available twice a year, minimum fee $10,000. He was very good, very reliable, but what his customers really paid for was the infallible predator's talent. John Renshaw was a human hawk, constructed by both genetics and environment to do two things superbly: kill and survive. After Bates's call, a buff-colored envelope appeared in Renshaw's box. A name, an address, a photograph. All committed to memory, then down the garbage disposal with the ashes of envelope and contents. This time, the face had been that of a sallow Miami businessman named Hans Morris, founder and owner of the Morris Toy Company. Someone had wanted Morris out of the way and had gone to the organization. The organization, in the person of Calvin Bates, had talked to John Renshaw. Pow! Mourners please omit flowers. The door slid open. He picked up his package and stepped out. He unlocked the suite and stepped in. At this time of day, just after 3 p.m., the spacious living room was splashed with April sunshine. He paused for a moment, enjoying it, then put the package on the end table by the door and loosened his tie. He dropped the envelope on top of it and walked over to the terrace. He pushed open the sliding glass door and stepped out. It was cold, and the white wind knifed through his thin topcoat. Yet he paused a moment, looking over the city the way a general might survey a captured country. Traffic crawled beetle-like in the streets. Far away, almost buried in the golden afternoon haze, the Bay Bridge glittered like a madman's mirage. To the east, all but lost behind the downtown high-rises, the crammed and dirty tenements with their stainless steel forests of TV aerials. It was better up here, better than in the gutters. He went back inside, slid the door closed, and went into the bathroom for a long, hot shower. When he sat down 40 minutes later to regard his package, drink in hand, the shadows had marched halfway across the wine-colored carpet, and the best of the afternoon was past. It was a bomb. Of course it wasn't, but one proceeded as if it were. That was why one had remained upright and taking nourishment while so many others had gone to that great unemployment office in the sky. If it was a bomb, it was clockless. It sat, utterly silent, bland and enigmatic. Plastique was more likely these days. Anyway, less temperamental than the clock springs manufactured by West Clocks and Big Ben. Renshaw looked at the postmark. Miami, April 15. 5 days ago. So the bomb was not time set. It would have gone off in the hotel safe in that case. Miami. Yes. And that spiky backhand writing. There had been a framed photograph on the sallow businessman's desk. The photo had been of an even sallower old crone wearing a babushka. The script slanted across the bottom had read, "Best from your number one idea girl, Mom." What kind of a number one idea is this, Mom? A do-it-yourself extermination kit? He regarded the package with complete concentration, not moving, his hands folded. Extraneous questions, such as how Morris's number one idea girl might have discovered his address, did not occur to him. They were for later, for Cal Bates. Unimportant now. With a sudden, almost absent move, he took a small celluloid calendar out of his wallet and inserted it deftly under the twine that crisscrossed the brown paper. He slid it under the Scotch tape that held one end flap. The flap came loose, relaxing against the twine. He paused for a time, observing, then leaned close and sniffed. Cardboard, paper, string, nothing more. He walked around the box, squatted easily on his haunches, and repeated the process. Twilight was invading his apartment with gray, shadowy fingers. One of the flaps popped free of the restraining twine, showing a dull green box beneath. Metal. Hinged. He produced a pocket knife and cut the twine. It fell away, and a few helping prods with the tip of the knife revealed the box. It was green with black markings, and stenciled on the front in white letters were the words G.I. Joe, Vietnam Footlocker. Below that, 20 infantrymen, 10 helicopters, 2 BAR men, 2 bazooka men, 2 medics, 4 jeeps. Below that, a flag decal. Below that, in the corner, Morris Toy Company, Miami, Florida. He reached out to touch it, then withdrew his hand. Something inside the footlocker had moved. Renshaw stood up, not hurrying, and backed across the room toward the kitchen and the hall. He snapped on the lights. The Vietnam footlocker was rocking, making the brown paper beneath it rattle. It suddenly overbalanced and fell to the carpet with a soft thud, landing on one end. The hinged top opened a crack of perhaps 2 inches. Tiny foot soldiers, about an inch and a half tall, began to crawl out. Renshaw watched them, unblinking. His mind made no effort to cope with the real or unreal aspect of what he was seeing, only with the possible consequences for his survival. The soldiers were wearing minuscule army fatigues, helmets, and field packs. Tiny carbines were slung across their shoulders. 2 of them looked briefly across the room at Renshaw. Their eyes, no bigger than pencil points, glittered. 5, 10, 12, then all 20. One of them was gesturing, ordering the others. They lined themselves up along the crack that the fall had produced and began to push. The crack began to widen. Renshaw picked one of the large pillows off the couch and began to walk toward them. The commanding officer turned and gestured. The others whirled and unslung their carbines. There were tiny, almost delicate popping sounds, and Renshaw felt suddenly as if he had been stung by bees. He threw the pillow. It struck them, knocking them sprawling, then hit the box and knocked it wide open. Insect-like, with a faint, high whirring noise like chiggers, a cloud of miniature helicopters, painted jungle green, rose out of the box. Tiny "phut, phut" noises reached Renshaw's ears, and he saw pinprick-sized muzzle flashes coming from the open copter doors. Needles pricked his belly, his right arm, the side of his neck. He clawed out and got one. Sudden pain in his fingers, blood welling. The whirling blades had chopped them to the bone in diagonal scarlet hash marks. The others whirled out of range, circling him like horseflies. The stricken copter thumbed to the rug and lay still. Maybe that's thumped? It's a B that's printed, but it could be a P. Sudden excruciating pain in his foot made him cry out. One of the foot soldiers was standing on his shoe and bayoneting his ankle. The tiny face looked up, panting and grinning. Renshaw kicked at it, and the tiny body flew across the room to splatter on the wall. It did not leave blood, but a viscid purple smear. There was a tiny, coughing explosion, and blinding agony ripped his thigh. One of the bazooka men had come out of the footlocker. A small curl of smoke rose lazily from his weapon. Renshaw looked down at his leg and saw a blackened, smoking hole in his pants the size of a quarter. The flesh beneath was charred. The little bastard shot me. He turned and ran into the hall, then into his bedroom. One of the helicopters buzzed past his cheek, blades whirring busily. The small stutter of a BAR. Then it darted away. The gun beneath his pillow was a .44 Magnum, big enough to put a hole the size of 2 fists through anything it hit. Renshaw turned, holding the pistol in his hands. He realized coolly that he would be shooting at a moving target not much bigger than a flying light bulb. 2 of the copters whirred in. Sitting on the bed, Renshaw fired once. One of the helicopters exploded into nothingness. That's 2, he thought. He drew a bead on the second, squeezed the trigger. It jigged! God damn it, it jigged! The helicopter swooped at him, and then in a suddenly oh my gosh. The helicopter swooped at him in a sudden, deadly arc, fore and aft overhead props whirring with blinding speed. Renshaw caught a glimpse of one of the BAR men crouched at the open bay door, firing his weapon in short, deadly bursts, and then threw himself to the floor and rolled. My eyes! The bastard was going for my eyes! He came up on his back at the far wall, the gun held at chest level, but the copter was retreating. It seemed to pause for a moment and dip in recognition of Renshaw's superior firepower. Then it was gone, back toward the living room. Renshaw got up, wincing as his weight came down on the wounded leg. It was bleeding freely. And why not? He thought grimly. It's not everybody who gets hit point blank with a bazooka shell and lives to tell about it. So Mom was his #1 idea girl, was she? She was all that and a bit more. He shook a pillowcase free of the tick and ripped it into a bandage for his leg, then took his shaving mirror from the bureau and went to the hallway door. Kneeling, he shoved it out onto the carpet at an angle and peered in. They were bivouacking by the footlocker, damned if they weren't. Miniature soldiers ran hither and thither, setting up tents. Jeeps 2 inches high raced about importantly. A medic was working over the soldier Renshaw had kicked. The remaining 8 copters flew in a protective swarm overhead at coffee table level. Suddenly they became aware of the mirror, and 3 of the foot soldiers dropped to one knee and began firing. Seconds later, the mirror shattered in 4 places. Okay then. Renshaw went back to the bureau and got the heavy mahogany odds and ends box Linda had given him for Christmas. He hefted it once, nodded, and went to the doorway and lunged through. He wound up and fired like a pitcher throwing a fastball. The box described a swift, true vector and smashed little men like ninepins. One of the jeeps rolled over twice. Renshaw advanced to the doorway of the living room, sighted on one of the sprawling soldiers, and gave it to him. Several of the others had recovered. Some were kneeling and firing formally. Others had taken cover. Still others had retreated back into the footlocker. The bee stings began to pepper his legs and torso, but none reached higher than his rib cage. Perhaps the range was too great. It didn't matter. He had no intention of being turned away. This was it. He missed with his next shot. They were so goddamn small. But the following one sent another soldier into a broken sprawl. The copters were buzzing toward him ferociously. Now the tiny bullets began to splat into his face, above and below his eyes. He potted the lead copter, then the second. Jagged streaks of pain silvered his vision. The remaining 6 split into 2 retreating wings. His face was wet with blood, and he swiped at it with his forearm. He was ready to start firing again when he paused. The soldiers who had retreated inside the footlocker were trundling something out. Something that looked like... There was a blinding sizzle of yellow fire, and a sudden gust of wood and plaster exploded from the wall on his left. A rocket launcher! He squeezed off one shot at it, missed, wheeled, and ran for the bathroom at the far end of the corridor. He slammed the door and locked it. In the bathroom mirror, an Indian was staring back at him with dazed and haunted eyes. A battle-crazed Indian with thin streamers of red paint drawn from holes no bigger than grains of pepper. A ragged flap of skin dangled from one cheek. There was a gouged furrow in his neck. I'm losing. He ran a shaking hand through his hair. The front door was cut off. So was the phone and the kitchen extension. They had a goddamn rocket launcher, and a direct hit would tear his head off. Damn it, that wasn't even listed on the box. He started to draw in a long breath and let it out in a sudden grunt as a fist-sized section of the door blew away in a charred burst of wood. Tiny flames glowed briefly around the edges of the hole, and he saw the brilliant flash as they launched another round. More wood blew inward, scattering burning slivers on the bathroom rug. He stamped them out, and 2 of the copters buzzed angrily through the hole. Minuscule BAR slugs stitched his chest. With a whining groan of rage, he smashed one out of the air bare-handed, sustaining a picket fence of deep slashes across his palm. In sudden, desperate invention, he slung a heavy bath towel over the other. It fell, writhing, to the floor, and he stamped the life out of it. His breath was coming in hoarse whoops. Blood ran into one eye, hot and stinging, and he wiped it away. There, God damn it, there! That'll make them think. Indeed, it did seem to be making them think. There was no movement for 15 minutes. Renshaw sat on the edge of the tub, thinking feverishly. There had to be a way out of this blind alley. There had to be. If there was only a way to flank them. He suddenly turned and looked at the small window over the tub. There was a way. Of course there was. His eyes dropped to the can of lighter fluid on top of the medicine cabinet. He was reaching for it when the rustling noise came. He whirled, bringing the magnum up, but it was only a tiny scrap of paper shoved under the crack of the door. The crack, Renshaw noted grimly, was too narrow for even one of them to get through. There was one tiny word written on the paper. Surrender. Renshaw smiled grimly and put the lighter fluid in his breast pocket. There was a chewed stub of pencil beside it. He scrawled one word on the paper and shoved it back under the door. The word was nuts. There was a sudden blinding barrage of rocket shells, and Renshaw backed away. They arched through the hole in the door and detonated against the pale blue tiles above the towel rack, turning the elegant wall into a pocket lunar landscape. Renshaw threw a hand over his eyes as plaster flew in a hot rain of shrapnel. Burning holes ripped through his shirt and his back was peppered. When the barrage stopped, Renshaw moved. He climbed on top of the tub and slid the window open. Cold stars looked in at him. There was a narrow window and a narrow ledge beyond it, but there was no time to think of that. He boosted himself through, and the cold air slapped his lacerated face and neck like an open hand. He was leaning over the balance point of his hands, staring straight down. 40 stories down. From this height, the street looked no wider than a child's train track. The bright, winking lights of the city glittered madly below him like thrown jewels. With the deceptive ease of a trained gymnast, Renshaw brought his knees up to rest on the lower edge of the window. If one of those wasp-sized copters flew through that hole in the door now, one shot in the ass would send him straight down, screaming all the way. None did. He twisted, thrust one leg out, and one reaching hand grabbed the overhead cornice and held. A moment later he was standing on the ledge outside the window. Deliberately not thinking of the horrifying drop below his heels, not thinking of what would happen if one of the helicopters buzzed out after him, Renshaw edged toward the corner of the building. 15 feet. 10. There. He paused, his chest pressed against the wall, hands splayed out on the rough surface. He could feel the lighter fluid in his breast pocket and the reassuring weight of the magnum jammed in his waistband. Now to get around the goddamn corner. Gently, he eased one foot around and slid his weight onto it. Now the right ankle was pressed razor-like into his chest and gut. There was a smear of bird guano in front of his eyes on the rough stone. Christ, he thought crazily, I didn't know they could fly this high. His left foot slipped. For a weird, timeless moment, he tottered over the brink, right arm backwatering madly for balance. Backwatering? And then he was clutching the two sides of the building in a lover's embrace, face pressed against the hard corner, breath shuddering in and out of his lungs. A bit at a time, he slid the other foot around. 30 feet away, his own living room terrace jutted out. He made his way down to it, breath sliding in and out of his lungs with shallow force. Twice he was forced to stop as sharp gusts of wind tried to pick him off the ledge. Then he was there, gripping the ornamented iron railings. He hoisted himself over noiselessly. He had left the curtains half drawn across the sliding glass partition, and now he peered in, cautiously. They were just the way he wanted them. Ass, too. 4 soldiers and 1 copter had been left to guard the footlocker. The rest would be outside the bathroom door with the rocket launcher. Okay. In through the opening like gangbusters. Wipe out the ones by the footlocker, then out the door. Then a quick taxi to the airport. Off to Miami to find Morris's #1 idea girl. He thought he might just burn her face off with a flamethrower. That would be poetic justice. He took off his shirt and ripped a long strip from one sleeve. He dropped the rest to flutter limply by his feet, and bit off the plastic spout on the can of lighter fluid. He stuffed one end of the rag inside, withdrew it, and stuffed the other end in so only a 6-inch strip of saturated cotton hung free. He got out his lighter, took a deep breath, and thumbed the wheel. He tipped it to the cloth, and as it sprang alight, he rammed open the glass partition and plunged through. The copter reacted instantly, kamikaze diving him as he charged across the rug, dripping tiny splatters of liquid fire. Renshaw straight-armed it, hardly noticing the jolt of pain that ran up his arm as the turning blades chopped his flesh open. The tiny foot soldiers scattered into the footlocker. After that, it all happened very rapidly. Renshaw threw the lighter fluid. The can caught, mushrooming into a licking fireball. The next instant, he was reversing, running for the door. He never knew what hit him. It was like the thud that a steel safe would make when dropped from a respectable height. Only this thud ran through the entire high-rise apartment building, thrumming in its steel frame like a tuning fork. The penthouse door blew off its hinges and shattered against the far wall. A couple who had been walking hand in hand below looked up in time to see a very large white flash, as though 100 flashing guns had gone off at once. "Somebody blew a fuse," the man said. "I guess." "What's that?" his girl asked. Something was fluttering lazily down toward them. He caught it in one outstretched hand. "Jesus, it's some guy's shirt, all full of little holes. Bloody, too." "I don't like it," she said nervously. "Call a cab, huh, Ralph? We'll have to talk to the cops if something happened up there, and I ain't supposed to be out with you." "Sure, yeah." He looked around, saw a taxi, and whistled. Its brake lights flared, and they ran across to get it. Behind them, unseen, a tiny scrap of paper floated down and landed near the remains of John Renshaw's shirt. Spiky backhand script read, "Hey kids, special in this Vietnam footlocker. For a limited time only, 1 rocket launcher, 20 surface-to-air Twister missiles, and 1 scale model thermonuclear weapon." And that was Battleground by Stephen King. It's cute. It's cute is what it is. It's cute. It's kind of like oh, what was that movie from the 90s? I think it had Tommy Lee Jones in it. Small Soldiers, something like that, where a bunch of uh, toy soldier things come alive and wreak havoc for the duration of the movie. Okay, let me make sure I've got. Here we go. This one's a little longer. So this next one is called Trucks, and if you've ever seen the movie Maximum Overdrive, which is about killer vehicles after a like comet flies over Earth or something, that is what this is. This is what that is based on. That is, oh, what's his name? Emilio Estevez? No, 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 no. I think it's, or maybe it's either Emilio Estevez or one of the Sheens. Um, I think possibly Charlie Sheen's younger brother. I don't remember now off the top of my head. But yeah, look it up. Maximum Overdrive. It's a corny movie. It's very, very 80s. Um, but it's pretty close. It's funny how someone can take a, what is this, maybe 12 pages tops on the outside, short story and turn it into a feature length movie presentation. Alrighty. Let me just get a little water in me. Ah. Trucks by Stephen King. The guy's name was Snodgrass, and I could see him getting ready to do something crazy. His eyes had gotten bigger, showing a lot of the whites, like a dog getting ready to fight. The 2 kids who had come skidding into the parking lot in the old Fury were trying to talk to him, but his head was cocked as though he was hearing other voices. He had a tight little potbelly encased in a good suit that was getting a little shiny in the seat. He was a salesman, and he kept his display bag close to him, like a pet dog that had gone to sleep. "Try the radio again," the truck driver said. "Try the radio again," the truck driver at the counter said. The short order cook shrugged and turned it on. He flipped it across the band and got nothing but static. "You went too fast," the trucker protested. "You might have missed something." "Hell, the short order cook said. He was an elderly black man with a smile of gold, and he wasn't looking at the trucker. He was looking through the dinner-length picture window at the parking lot. 7 or 8 heavy trucks were out there, engines rumbling in low, idling roars that sounded like big cats purring. There were a couple of Macs, a Hemingway, and 4 or 5 Rios. Trailer trucks, interstate haulers, with a lot of license plates and CB whip antennas on the back. The Kid's Fury was lying on its roof at the end of long, looping skid marks in the loose, crushed rock of the parking lot. It had been battered into senseless junk. At the entrance to the truck stop's turnaround, there was a blasted Cadillac. Its owner stared out of the star-shattered windshield like a gutted fish. Horn-rimmed glasses hung from one ear. Halfway across the lot from it, there lay the body of a girl in a pink dress. She had jumped from the caddy when she saw it wasn't going to make it. She had hit running, but never had a chance. She was the worst, even though she was face down. There were flies around her in clouds. Across the road, an old Ford station wagon had been slammed through the guardrails. That had happened an hour ago. No one had been by since. You couldn't see the turnpike from the window, and the phone was out. "You went too fast," the trucker was protesting. "You oughta—" That was when Snodgrass bolted. He turned the table over, getting up, smashing coffee cups and sending sugar in a wild spray. His eyes were wilder than ever, and his mouth hung loosely, and he was blabbering. "We gotta get out of here! We gotta get out of here! We gotta get out of here!" The Kid shouted, and his girlfriend screamed. I was on the stool closest to the door, and I got a handful of his shirt, but he tore loose. He was cranked up all the way. He would have gone through a bank vault door. He slammed out the door, and then he was sprinting across the gravel toward the drainage ditch on the left. 2 of the trucks lunged after him, smokestacks blowing diesel exhaust dark brown against the sky, huge rear wheels machine-gunning gravel up in sprays. He couldn't have been any more than 5 or 6 running steps from the edge of the flat parking lot when he turned back to look, fear scrawled on his face. His feet tangled each other, and he faltered and almost fell down. He got his balance again, but it was too late. One of the trucks gave way, and the other charged down, huge front grille glittering savagely in the sun. Snodgrass screamed, the sound high and thin, nearly lost under the Rio's heavy diesel roar. It didn't drag him under. As things turned out, it would have been better if it had. Instead, it drove him up and out, the way a punter kicks a football. For a moment, he was silhouetted against the hot afternoon sky like a crippled scarecrow, and then he was gone into the drainage ditch. The big truck's brakes hissed like dragon's breath. Its front wheels locked, digging grooves into the gravel skin of the lot, and it stopped inches from jackknifing in. The bastard. The girl in the booth screamed. Both hands were clamped into her cheeks, dragging the flesh down, turning it into a witch's mask. Glass broke. I turned my head and saw that the trucker had squeezed his glass hard enough to break it. I don't think he knew it yet. Milk and a few drops of blood fell onto the counter. The black counterman was frozen by the radio, a dishcloth in hand, looking amazed. His teeth glittered. For a moment there was no sound but the buzzing west clocks and the rumbling of the Rio's engine as it returned to its fellows. Then the girl began to cry, and it was all right. Or at least better. My own car was around the side, also battered into junk. It was a 1971 Camaro, and I had still been paying on it, but I didn't suppose that mattered now. There was no one in the trucks. The sun glittered and flashed on empty cabs. The wheels turned themselves. You couldn't think about it too much. You'd go insane if you thought about it too much. Like Snodgrass. 2 hours passed. The sun began to go down. Outside, the trucks patrolled in slow circles and figure eights. Their parking lights and running lights had come on. I walked the length of the counter twice to get the kinks out of my legs, and then sat in a booth by the long front window. It was a standard truck stop, close to the major thruway, a complete service facility out back, gas and diesel fuel both. The truckers came here for coffee and pie. Mister? The voice was hesitant. I looked around. It was the two kids from the Fury. The boy looked about 19. He had long hair and a beard that was just starting to take hold. His girl looked younger. Yeah? What happened to you? I shrugged. I was coming up the interstate to Pelson, I said. A truck came up behind me. I could see it in the mirror a long way off, really highballing. You could hear it a mile down the road. It whipped out around a VW Beetle and just snapped it off the road with the whiplash of the trailer, the way you'd snap a ball of paper off a table with your finger. I thought the truck would go too. No driver could have held it with the trailer whipping that way. But it didn't go. The VW flopped over 6 or 7 times and exploded. And the truck got the next one coming up the same way. It was coming up on me, and I took the exit ramp in a hurry. I laughed, but my heart wasn't in it. Right into a truck stop, of all places. From the frying pan into the fire. The girl swallowed. We saw a greyhound going north in the southbound lane. It was plowing through cars. It exploded and burned, but before it did, slaughter. A greyhound bus. That was something new. And bad. Outside, all the headlights suddenly popped on in unison, bathing the lot in an eerie, depthless glare. Growling, they cruised back and forth. The headlights seemed to give them eyes, and in the growing gloom, the dark trailer boxes looked like the hunched, squared-off shoulders of prehistoric giants. The counterman said, "Is it safe to turn on the lights?" "Do it," I said, "and find out." He flipped the switches, and a series of fly-specked globes overhead came on. At the same time, a neon sign out front stuttered into life. Conant's Truck Stop and Diner. Good Eats. Nothing happened. The trucks continued their patrol. "I can't understand it," the trucker said. He had gotten down from his stool and was walking around, his hand wrapped in a red engineer's bandana. "I ain't had no problems with my rig. She's a good old girl. I pulled in here a little past 1 for a spaghetti dinner, and this happens." He waved his arms, and the bandana flapped. "My own rig's out there right now, the one with the weak left tail light. Been driving her for 6 years, but if I stepped out that door—" "It's just startin'," the counterman said. His eyes were hooded and obsidian. "Must be bad if the radio's gone. It's just startin'." The girl had drained as pale as milk. "Never mind that," I said to the counterman. "Not yet." "What would do it?" The trucker was worrying. "Electrical storms in the atmosphere? Nuclear testing? What?" "Maybe they're mad," I said. Around 7 o'clock, I walked over to the counterman. "How are we fixed here? I mean, if we have to stay a while." His brow wrinkled. "Not so bad. Yes'day was delivery day. We got 200-300 Hamburg patties, canned fruit and vegetables, dry cereal, eggs. No more milk than what's in the cooler, but the water's from the well. If we had to, the 5 of us could get out for a month or more." The trucker came over and blinked at us. "I'm dead out of cigarettes. Now that cigarette machine—" "It ain't my machine," the counterman said. "No, sir." The trucker had a steel pinch bar he'd gotten in the supply room out back. He went to work on the machine. The kid went down to where the jukebox glittered and flashed and plugged in a quarter. John Fogerty began to sing about being born on the bayou. I sat down and looked out the window. I saw something I didn't like right away. A Chevy light pickup had joined the patrol, like a Shetland pony amid Percherons. I watched it until it rolled impartially over the body of the girl from the caddy, and then I looked away. "We made them!" the girl cried out with sudden wretchedness. "They can't!" Her boyfriend told her to hush. The trucker got the cigarette machine open and helped himself to 6 or 8 packs of Viceroys. He put them in different pockets and then ripped one pack open. From the intent expression on his face, I wasn't sure if he was going to smoke them or eat them up. Another record came on the juke. It was 8 o'clock. At 8:30, the power went off. When the lights went, the girl screamed, a cry that stopped suddenly, as if her boyfriend had put his hand over her mouth. The jukebox died with a deepening, unwinding sound. "What the Christ!" the trucker said. "Counterman," I called. "You got any candles?" "I think so. Wait. Yeah, here's a few." I got up and took them. We lit them and started placing them around. "Be careful," I said. "If we burn the place down, there's the devil to pay." He chuckled morosely. "You know it." When we were done placing the candles, the kid and his girl were huddled together and the trucker was by the back door, watching 6 more heavy trucks weaving in and out behind the concrete fuel islands. "This changes things, doesn't it?" I said. "Damn right, if the power's gone for good." "How bad?" "Hamburg'll go over in 3 days. Rest of the meat and eggs'll go by about as quick. The cans'll be okay, and the dry stuff. That ain't the worst. We ain't gonna have no water without the pump." "How long?" "Without no water? A week. Fill every empty jug you've got. Fill them till you can't draw anything but air. Where are the toilets? There's good water in the tanks." "Employees' restrooms in the back, but you have to go outside to get the ladies and gents." "Across to the service building?" I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. "No, out the side door and up a ways." "Give me a couple of buckets." He found 2 galvanized pails. The kid strolled up. "What are you doing?" "What are you doing?" "We have to get water. All we can get." "Give me a bucket, then." I handed him one. "Jerry!" the girl cried. "You—" He looked at her, and she didn't say anything else, but she picked up a napkin and began to tear at the corners. The trucker was smoking another cigarette and grinning at the floor. He didn't speak up. We walked over to the side door where I'd come in the afternoon, and stood there for a second, watching the shadows wax and wane as the trucks went back and forth. "Now?" the kid said. His arm brushed mine, and the muscles were jumping and humming like wires. If anyone bumped into him, he'd go straight up to heaven. "Relax," I said. He smiled a little. It was a sick smile, but better than none. "Okay." We slipped out. The night air had cooled. Crickets chirred in the grass, and the frogs thumped and croaked in the drainage ditch. Out here, the rumble of the trucks was louder, more menacing, the sound of beasts. From inside, it was a movie. Out here, it was real. You could get killed. We slid along the tiled outer wall. A slight overhang gave us some shadow. My Camaro was huddled against the cyclone fence across from us, and faint light from the roadside signs glinted on broken metal and puddles of gas and oil. "You take the ladies," I whispered. "Fill your bucket from the toilet tank and wait." Steady diesel rumblings. It was tricky. You thought they were coming, but it was only echoes bouncing off the building's odd corners. It was only 20 feet, but it seemed much farther. He opened the ladies' room door and went in. I went past, and then I was inside the gents. I could feel my muscles loosen and a breath whistled out of me. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, strained white face with dark eyes. I got the porcelain tank cover off and dunked the bucket full. I poured a little back to keep from sloshing and went to the door. Hey? Yeah, he breathed. You ready? Yeah. We went out again. We got maybe 6 steps before lights blared in our faces. It had crept up, big wheels barely turning on the gravel. It had been lying in wait, and now it leaped at us, electric headlamps glowing in savage circles, the huge chrome grille seeming to snarl. The kid froze, his face stamped with horror, his eyes blank, the pupils dilated down to pinpricks. Dilated? Wait a minute. If your pupils are dilated, it means they're wide. What is he? Never mind. I gave him a hard shove, spilling half his water. Go! Yeah, they'd be contracted down to pinpricks. Whatever, Stephen. The thunder of that diesel engine rose to a shriek. I reached over the kid's shoulder to yank the door open, but before I could, it was shoved from inside. The kid lunged in, and I dodged after him. I looked back to see the truck, a big cab over Peterbilt, kiss off the tiled outside wall, peeling away jagged hunks of the tile. There was an ear-grinding squealing noise, like gigantic fingers scraping a blackboard. Then the right mudguard and the corners of the grill smashed into the still open door, sending glass in a crystal spray and snapping the door's steel gauge hinges like tissue paper. The door flew into the night like something out of a Dali painting, and the truck accelerated toward the front parking lot, its exhaust racketing like machine gun fire. It had a disappointed, angry sound. The kid put his bucket down and collapsed into the girl's arms, shuddering. My heart was thudding heavily in my chest, and my calves felt like water. And speaking of water, we had brought back about a bucket and a quarter between us. It hardly seemed worth it. I want to block up that doorway, I said to the counterman. What'll do the trick? Well, the trucker broke in. Why? One of those big trucks couldn't get a wheel in through there. It's not the big trucks I'm worried about. The trucker began hunting for a smoke. We got some sheet siding out in the supply room, the counterman said. Boss was going to put up a shed to store butane gas. We'll put them across and prop them with a couple of booths. It'll help, the trucker said. It took about an hour, and by the end we'd all gotten into the act, even the girl. It was fairly solid. Of course, fairly solid wasn't going to be good enough, not if something hit it at full speed. I think they all knew that. There were still 3 booths arranged along the big glass picture window, and I sat down in one of them. The clock behind the counter had stopped at 8:32, but it felt like 10. Outside, the trucks prowled and growled. Some left, hurrying off to unknown missions, and others came. There were 3 pickup trucks now, circling importantly amid their bigger brothers. I was starting to doze, and instead of counting sheep, I counted trucks. How many in the state? How many in America? Trailer trucks, pickup trucks, flatbeds, day haulers, 3/4 tons, army convoy trucks by the tens of thousands, and buses. Nightmare vision of a city bus, 2 wheels in the gutter and 2 wheels on the pavement, roaring along and plowing through screaming pedestrians like ninepins. I shook it off and fell into a light, troubled sleep. It must have been early morning when Snodgrass began to scream. A thin new moon had risen and was shining icily through the high scud of cloud. A new clattering note had been added, counterpointing the throaty, idling roar of the big rigs. I looked for it and saw a hay baler circling out by the darkened sign. The moonlight glanced off the sharp, turning spokes of its packer. The scream came again, unmistakably from the drainage ditch. "Help me!" "What was that?" It was the girl. In the shadows, her eyes were wide and looked horribly frightened. "Nothing," I said. "Help me!" "He's alive," she whispered. "Oh, God, alive!" I didn't have to see him. I could imagine it all too well. Snodgrass lying half in and half out of the drainage ditch, back and legs broken, carefully pressed suit caked with mud, white, gasping face turned up to the indifferent moon. "I don't hear anything," I said. "Do you?" She looked at me. "How can you? How?" "Now, if you woke him up," I said, jerking a thumb at the kid, "he might hear something. He might go out there. Would you like that?" Her face began to twitch and pull as if stitched by invisible needles. "Nothing," she whispered. "Nothing out there." She went back to her boyfriend and pressed her head against his chest. His arms came up around her in his sleep. No one else woke up. Snodgrass cried and wept and screamed for a long time, and then he stopped. Dawn. Another truck had arrived, this one a flatbed with a giant rack for hauling cars. It was joined by a bulldozer. That scared me. The trucker came over and twitched my arm. "Come on back," he whispered excitedly. The others were still sleeping. "Come look at this." I followed him back to the supply room. About 10 trucks were patrolling out there. At first, I didn't see anything new. "See," he said, and pointed. "Right there." Then I saw. One of the pickups was stopped dead. It was sitting there like a lump, all of the menace gone out of it. Out of gas? "That's right, buddy. And they can't pump their own. We got it knocked. All we have to do is wait." He smiled and fumbled for a cigarette. It was about 9 o'clock, and I was eating a piece of yesterday's pie for breakfast when the air horn began. Long, rolling blasts that rattled your skull. We went over to the windows and looked out. The trucks were sitting still, idling. One trailer truck, a huge Rio with a red cab, had pulled up almost to the narrow verge of grass between the restaurant and the parking lot. At this distance, the square grill was huge and murderous. The tires would stand to a man's chest cavity. The horn began to blare again, hard, hungry blasts that traveled off in straight, flat lines and echoed back. There was a pattern. Shorts and longs in some kind of rhythm. "That's Morse!" the kid, Jerry, suddenly exclaimed. The trucker looked at him. "How would you know?" The kid went a little red. "I learned it in the Boy Scouts." "You?" the trucker said. "You? Wow." He shook his head. "Never mind," I said. "Do you remember enough to—" "Sure. Let me listen. Got a pencil?" The counterman gave him one, and the kid began to write letters on a napkin. After a while, he stopped. "It's just saying attention over and over again. Wait." We waited. The air horn beat its longs and shorts into the still morning air. Then the pattern changed, and the kid started to write again. We hung over his shoulders and watched the message form. "Someone must pump fuel. Someone will not be harmed. All fuel must be pumped. This shall be done now. Now someone will pump fuel." The air blasts kept up. but the kid stopped writing. "It's just repeating attention again," he said. The truck repeated its message again and again. I didn't like the look of the words, printed on the napkin in block style. They looked machine-like, ruthless. There would be no compromise with those words. You did or you didn't. "Well," the kid said, "what do we do?" "Nothin'," the trucker said. His face was excited and working. "All we have to do is wait. They may all be low on fuel. One of the little ones out back is already stopped. All we have to do..." The air horns stopped. The truck backed up and joined its fellows. They waited in a semicircle, headlights pointed in toward us. "There's a bulldozer out there," I said. Jerry looked at me. "You think they'll rip the place down?" "Yes." He looked at the counterman. "They couldn't do that, could they?" The counterman shrugged. "We ought to vote," the trucker said. "No blackmail, damn it. All we gotta do is wait." He had repeated it 3 times now, like a charm. "Okay," I said. "Vote." "Wait," the trucker said immediately. "I think we ought to fuel them," I said. "We can wait for a better chance to get away. Counterman?" "Stay in here," he said. "You want to be their slaves? That's what it'll come to. You want to spend the rest of your life changing oil filters every time one of those things blasts his horn? Not me." He looked darkly out the window. "Let 'em starve." I looked at the kid and the girl. "I think he's right," he said. "That's the only way to stop them. If someone was going to rescue us, they would have. God knows what's going on in other places." And the girl, with Snodgrass in her eyes, nodded and stepped closer to him. "That's it, then," I said. I went over to the cigarette machine and got a pack without looking at the brand. I'd stopped smoking a year ago, but this seemed like a good time to start again. The smoke rasped harsh in my lungs. 20 minutes crawled by. The trucks out front waited. In back, they were lining up at the pumps. "I think it was all a bluff," the trucker said. "Just..." Then there was a louder, harsher, choppier note, the sound of an engine revving up and falling off, then revving up again. The bulldozer. It glittered like a yellow jacket in the sun, a caterpillar with clattering steel treads. Black smoke belched from its short stack as it wheeled around to face us. "It's going to charge," the trucker said. There was a look of utter surprise on his face. "It's going to charge." "Get back," I said. "Behind the counter." The bulldozer was still revving. Gearshift levers moved themselves. Heat shimmer hung over its smoking stack. Suddenly, the dozer blade lifted, a heavy steel curve clotted with dried dirt. Then, with a screaming howl of power, it roared straight at us. "The counter!" I gave the trucker a shove, and that started them. There was a small concrete verge between the parking lot and the grass. The dozer charged over it, blade lifting for a moment, and then it rammed the front wall head on. Glass exploded inward with a heavy, coughing roar, and the wood frame crashed into splinters. One of the overhead light globes fell, splashing more glass. Crockery fell from the shelves. The girl was screaming, but the sound was almost lost beneath the steady, pounding roar of the cat's engine. It reversed, clanked across the chewed strip of lawn, and lunged forward again, sending the remaining booths crashing and spinning. The pie case fell off the counter, sending pie wedges skidding across the floor. The counterman was crouching with his eyes shut, and the kid was holding his girl. The trucker was wall-eyed with fear. "We gotta stop it," he gibbered. "Tell 'em we'll do it. We'll do anything." "A little late, isn't it?" The cat reversed and got ready for another charge. New nicks in its blade glittered and heliographed in the sun. It lurched forward with a bellowing roar, and this time it took down the main support to the left of what had been the window. That section of the roof fell in with a grinding crash. Plaster dust billowed up. The dozer pulled free. Beyond it, I could see the group of trucks, waiting. I grabbed the counterman. "Where are the oil drums?" The cook stoves ran on butane gas, but I had seen vents for a warm air furnace. "Back at the storage room," he said. I grabbed the kid. "Come on." We got up and ran into the storage room. The bulldozer hit again, and the building trembled. 2 or 3 more hits, and it would be able to come right up to the counter for a cup of coffee. There were 2 large 50-gallon drums with feeds to the furnace and turn spigots. There was a carton of empty ketchup bottles near the back door. "Get those, Jerry." While he did, I pulled off my shirt and yanked it to rags. The dozer hit again and again, and each hit was accompanied by the sound of more breakage. I filled 4 of the ketchup bottles from the spigots, and he stuffed rags into them. "You play football?" I asked him. "In high school." "Okay, pretend you're going in from the 5." We went out into the restaurant. The whole front wall was open to the sky. Sprays of glass glittered like diamonds. One heavy beam had fallen diagonally across the opening. The dozer was backing up to take it out, and I thought that this time it would keep coming, ripping through the stools, and then demolishing the counter itself. We knelt down and thrust the bottles out. "Light 'em up," I said to the trucker. He got his matches out, but his hands were shaking too badly, and he dropped them. The counterman picked them up, struck one, and the hunks of shirt blazed greasily alight. "Quick," I said. We ran, the kid a little in the lead. Glass crunched and gritted underfoot. There was a hot, oily smell in the air. Everything was very loud, very bright. The dozer charged. The kid dodged out under the beam and stood silhouetted in front of that heavy tempered steel blade. I went out to the right. The kid's first throw fell short. His second hit the blade, and the flame splashed harmlessly. He tried to turn, and then it was on him, a rolling juggernaut, 4 tons of steel. His hands flew up, and then he was gone, chewed under. I button-hooked around and lobbed one bottle into the open cab, and the second right into the works. They exploded together in a leaping shout of flame. For a moment, the dozer's engine rose in an almost human squeal of rage and pain. It wheeled in a maddened half-circle, ripping out the left corner of the diner, and rolled drunkenly toward the drainage ditch. The steel treads were streaked and dotted with gore, and where the kid had been there was something that looked like a crumpled towel. The dozer got almost to the ditch, flames boiling from under its cowling and from under the cockpit, and then it exploded in a geyser. I stumbled backward and almost fell over the pile of rubble. There was a hot smell that wasn't just oil. It was burning hair. I was on fire. I grabbed a tablecloth, jammed it on my head, ran behind the counter, and plunged my head into the sink hard enough to crack it on the bottom. The girl was screaming Jerry's name over and over in a shrieking, insane litany. I turned around and saw the huge car carrier slowly rolling toward the defenseless front of the diner. The trucker screamed and broke for the side door. "Don't!" the counterman cried. "Don't do that!" But he was out and sprinting for the drainage ditch and the open field beyond. The truck must have been standing sentry just out of sight of that side door. A small panel job with Wong's Cash and Carry Laundry written on the side. It ran him down almost before you could see it happen. Then it was gone, and only the trucker was left, twisted into the gravel. He had been knocked out of his shoes. The car carrier rolled slowly over the concrete verge, onto the grass, over the kid's remains, and stopped, with its huge snout poking into the diner. Its air horn let out a sudden, shattering honk, followed by another and another. "Stop!" the girl whimpered. "Stop! Oh, please, please stop!" But the honks went on, a long time. It took only a minute to pick up the pattern. It was the same as before. It wanted someone to feed it, and the others. "I'll go," I said. "Are the pumps unlocked?" The counterman nodded. He had aged 50 years. "No!" the girl screamed. She threw herself at me. "You've got to stop them! Beat them, burn them, break them!" Her voice wavered and broke into a harsh bray of grief and loss. The counterman held her. I went around the corner of the counter, picking my way through the rubble and out through the supply room. My heart was thudding heavily when I stepped out into the warm sun. I wanted another cigarette, but you don't smoke around fuel islands. The trucks were still lined up. The laundry truck was crouched across the gravel from me like a hound dog, growling and rasping. A funny move, and it would cream me. The sun glittered on its blank windshield, and I shuddered. It was like looking into the face of an idiot. I switched the pump to on and pulled out the nozzle, unscrewed the first gas cap, and began to pump fuel. It took me half an hour to pump the first tank dry, and then I moved on to the second island. I was alternating between gas and diesel. Trucks marched by endlessly. I was beginning to understand now. I was beginning to see. People were doing this all over the country, or they were lying dead like the trucker, knocked out of their boots with heavy tread marks smashed across their guts. The second tank was dry, and then I went to the third. The sun was like a hammer, and my head was starting to ache with the fumes. There were blisters in the soft webbing between my thumb and index finger. But they wouldn't know about that. They would know about leaky manifolds and bad gaskets and frozen universal joints, but not about blisters or sunstroke or the need to scream. They needed to know only one thing about their late masters, and they knew it. We bleed. The last tank was sucked dry, and I threw the nozzle on the ground. Still there were more trucks, lined up around the corner. I twisted my head to relieve the crick in my neck and stared. The line went out of the front parking lot and up the road and out of sight, 2 and 3 lanes deep. It was like a nightmare of the Los Angeles freeway at rush hour. The horizon shimmered and danced with their exhaust. The air stank of carburization. "No," I said. "Out of gas. All gone, fellas." And there was a heavier rumble, a bass note that shook the teeth. A huge silvery truck was pulling up, a tanker. Written on the side was, "Fill up with Phillips 66, the Jetport fuel." A heavy hose dropped out of the rear. I went over, took it, flipped up the feeder plate on the first tank, and attached the hose. The truck began to pump. The stench of petroleum sank into me, the same stink that the dinosaurs must have died smelling as they went down into the tar pits. I filled the other 2 tanks and then went back to work. Consciousness twinkled away to a point where I lost track of time and trucks. I unscrewed, rammed the nozzle into the hole, pumped until the hot, heavy liquid splurted out, then replaced the cap. My blisters broke, trickling pus down to my wrists. My head was pounding like a rotted tooth, and my stomach rolled helplessly with the stench of hydrocarbons. I was going to faint. I was going to faint, and that would be the end of it. I would pump until I dropped. Then there were hands on my shoulders, the dark hands of the counterman. "Go in," he said. "Rest yourself. I'll take over till dark. You try to sleep." I handed him the pump. "But I can't sleep." "The girl is sleeping. She's sprawled over in the corner with her head on the tablecloth, and her face won't unknot itself, even in sleep. It's the timeless, ageless face of the war hag. I'm going to get her up pretty quick. It's twilight, and the counterman has been out there for 5 hours. Still, they keep coming. I look out through the wrecked window, and their headlights stretch for a mile or better, twinkling like yellow sapphires in the growing darkness. They must be backed up all the way to the turnpike, maybe further. The girl will have to take her turn. I can show her how. She'll say she can't, but she will. She wants to live. You want to be their slaves? The counterman had said. That's what it'll come to. You want to spend the rest of your life changing oil filters every time one of those things blats its horn? We could run, maybe. It'd be easy to make the drainage ditch now, the way they're stacked up. Run through the fields, through the marshy places where the trucks would bog down like mastodons, and go back to the caves, drawing pictures in charcoal. This is the moon god. This is a tree. This is a Mac Semi overwhelming a hunter. Not even that. So much of the world is paved now. Even the playgrounds are paved. And for the fields and marshes and deep woods, there are tanks, half-tracks, flatbeds equipped with lasers, masers, heat-seeking radar. And little by little, they can make it into the world they want. I can see great convoys of trucks filling the Okefenokee swamp with sand, the bulldozers ripping through the national parks and wildlands, grading the earth flat, stamping it into one great flat plain. And then the hot top trucks arriving. But they're machines. No matter what's happened to them, what mass consciousness we've given them, they can't reproduce. In 50 or 60 years, they'll be rusting hulks with all menace gone out of them, moveless carcasses for free men to stone and spit at. And if I close my eyes, I can see the production lines in Detroit and Dearborn and Youngstown and Mackinac, new trucks being put together by blue-collars who no longer even punch a clock, but only drop and are replaced. The counterman is staggering a little now. He's an old bastard, too. I've got to wake the girl. 2 planes are leaving silver contrails etched across the darkening eastern horizon. I wish I could believe there are people in them. And that was Trucks by Stephen King. Oh yeah, it's a cute one. Take the mundane and make it malevolent is kind of the byword of this particular short story collection. In many ways, that's kind of the story of Stephen King's success in many regards, with as far as his horror novels are concerned. Is take the mundane, make it malevolent. With it, it's clowns. With uh, oh, what's that one? I can see it right in front of my face. The Regulators, I think it is. With the Regulators, it's a small special child being possessed by not Satan. Um, with Christine, it's a car. With Carrie, it's a high school girl, a jilted high school girl with pyrokinesis. What's the worst that can happen? Let's pour pig's blood on her. What's the at prom? What's the worst that could possibly happen? Oh yeah, she just burns the whole damn place down. Let's see. Just giving my voice a break here. One sec. Uh, how long is Graveyard Shift? It's longer than Trucks. I know that because Trucks is like 12 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 16 pages. Whereas Graveyard Shift is quite a bit longer. 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Just this side of 18 pages, so probably like 17 pages. It's a bit longer. Um, it's also a bit more horrifying, I guess. It's more traditional in the horror aspect. And unfortunately for this one, I've got to come up with a bunch of different roughneck voices on the fly. So, almost ready. Give me another sec. In fact, I'm about to grab a Ricola. Uh, so, Graveyard Shift. I hope you like rodents. Oh, I hope you like rodents a lot. I hope you like rodents and darkness a lot, because you're in for a bit. Um, Possibly what I should mention is this is probably the last one of these Stephen King excursions I'm going to do for a while, because coming up for next week, I'm hoping to do, hoping, I am going to do, unless I'm not available at all, um, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. A few months back, I had an ultimatum, which I don't think anyone responded to, which was asking, would people like to do me to read Blind Sight by Peter Watts or Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson? Well, uh, did a good old coin toss and picked um, Blind Sight was the winner of that one. So now I'm doing Snow Crash just in time for, some actual snow. Mind you, there is, I don't think, a single bit of snow in the entirety of that book, barring one scene where somebody is in a Freon-cooled truck cab. Um, Unless that's from a William Gibson novel, and I'm conflating, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. So that'll be for next week. But for this week, I'm gonna do Graveyard Shift. I have other Stephen King short story collections. I don't know. None of them, in my opinion, are quite as good as Night Shift. I think Night Shift is probably my favorite. Uh, but no matter. No matter indeed. All right. Prepare for unpleasantness. Graveyard Shift by Stephen King. 2 a.m. Friday. Hall was sitting on the bench by the elevator, the only place on the third floor where a workin' Joe could catch a smoke, when Warwick came up. He wasn't happy to see Warwick. The foreman wasn't supposed to show up on 3 during the graveyard shift. He was supposed to stay down in his office in the basement drinking coffee from the urn that stood in the corner of his desk. Besides, it was hot. It was the hottest June on record in Gates Falls, and the Orange Crush thermometer, which was also by the elevator, had once rested at 94 degrees at 3 in the morning. God only knew what kind of hellhole the mill was on the 3 to 11 shift. Hall worked the picker machine, a bulky gadget manufactured by a defunct Cleveland firm in 1934. He had only been working in the mill since April, which meant he was still making minimum 178 an hour, which was still all right. No wife, no steady girl, no alimony. He was a drifter, and during the last 3 years he had moved on his thumb from Berkeley, college student, to Lake Tahoe, busboy, to Galveston, stevedore, to Miami, short order cook, to Wheeling, taxi driver and dishwasher, to Gates Falls, Maine, picker machine operator. He didn't figure on moving again until the snow fell. He was a solitary person, and he liked the hours from 11 to 7 when the blood flow of the big mill was at its coolest, not to mention the temperature. The only thing he did not like was the rats. The third floor was long and deserted, lit only by the sputtering glow of the fluorescents. Unlike the other levels of the mill, it was relatively silent and unoccupied, at least by the humans. The rats were another matter. The only machine on 3 was the picker. The rest of the floor was storage for the 90-pound bags of fiber which had yet to be sorted by Hall's long gear-toothed machine. They were stacked like link sausages in long rows, some of them, especially the discontinued Meltons and irregular Slipes for which there were no orders, years old and dirty gray with industrial wastes. They made fine nesting places for the rats, huge, fat-bellied creatures with rabid eyes and bodies that jumped with lice and vermin. Hall had developed a habit of collecting a small arsenal of soft drink cans from the trash barrel during his break. He pegged them at the rats during times when work was slow, retrieving them later at his leisure. Only this time Mr. Foreman had caught him, coming up the stairs instead of using the elevator like the sneaky son of a bitch everyone said he was. "What are you up to, Hall?" "The rats," Hall said, realizing how lame that must sound, now that all the rats had snuggled safely back into their houses. "I peg cans at 'em when I see 'em." Warwick nodded once, briefly. He was a big, beefy man with a crew cut. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and his tie was pulled down. He looked at Hall closely. "We don't pay you to chuck cans at rats, mister. Not even if you pick them up again." "Harry hasn't sent down an order for 20 minutes," Hall answered, thinking, why couldn't you stay the hell put and drink your coffee? "I can't run it through the picker if I don't have it." Warwick nodded as if the topic no longer interested him. "Maybe I'll take a walk up and see Wisconski," he said. 5 to 1 he's reading a magazine while the crap piles up in his bins. Hall didn't say anything. Warwick suddenly pointed. "There's one. Get the bastard." Hall fired, and Nehi fired the Nehi can he had been holding with one whistling overhand motion. The rat, which had been watching them from atop one of the fabric bags with its bright buckshot eyes, fled with one faint squeak. Warwick threw back his head and laughed as Hall went after the can. "I came to see you about something else," Warwick said. "Is that so?" "Next week's 4th of July week." Hall nodded. The mill would be shut down Monday to Saturday, vacation week for men with at least 1 year's tenure, layoff week for men with less than a year.
"You want to work?"
Hall shrugged. "Doing what?"
"We're gonna clean the whole basement level. Nobody's touched it for 12 years. Hell of a mess. We're gonna use hoses."
"The town zoning committee getting on the board of directors?" Warwick looked steadily at Hall.
"You want it or not? 2 an hour, double time on the 4th. We're working the graveyard shift because it'll be cooler."
Hall calculated. He could clear maybe $75 after taxes. Better than the goose egg he had been looking forward to. "All right."
"Report down by the dye house next Monday."
Hall watched him as he started back to the stairs. Warwick paused halfway there and turned back to look at Hall.
"You used to be a college boy, didn't you?"
Hall nodded.
"Okay, college boy. I'm keeping it in mind."
He left. Hall sat down and lit another smoke, holding a soda can in one hand and watching for the rats. He could just imagine how it would be in the basement. The sub-basement, actually, a level below the dye house. Damp, dark, full of spiders and rotten cloth and ooze from the river. And rats. Maybe even bats, the aviators of the rodent family. Blech. Hall threw the can hard, then smiled thinly to himself as the faint sound of Warwick's voice came down through the overhead ducts, reading Harry Wisconski, the Riot Act.
Okay, college boy, I'm keeping it in mind.
He stopped smiling abruptly and butted his smoke. A few moments later, Wisconski started to send rough nylon down through the blowers, and Hall went to work. And after a while, the rats came out and sat atop the bags at the back of the long room, watching him with their unblinking black eyes. They looked like a jury. "11 p.m., Monday. There were about 36 men sitting around when Warwick came in wearing a pair of old jeans tucked into high rubber boots. Hall had been listening to Harry Wisconski, who was enormously fat, enormously lazy, and enormously gloomy.
It's gonna be a mess,
Wisconski was saying when Mr. Foreman came in.
You wait and see. We're all gonna go home blacker than midnight in Persia. Okay, Warwick said. We strung 60 light bulbs down there, so it should be bright enough for you to see what you're doing. You guys, he pointed to a bunch of men that had been leaning against the drying spools, I want you to hook up the hoses over there to the main water conduit by the stairwell. You can unroll them down the stairs. We got about 80 yards for each man, and that should be plenty. Don't get cute and spray one of your buddies, or you'll send them to the hospital. They pack a wallop.
Somebody'll get hurt, Wisconski prophesied sourly.
Wait and see.
You other guys, Warwick said, pointing to the group that Hall and Wisconski were part of.
You're the crap crew tonight. You go in pairs with an electric wagon for each team. There's old office furniture, bags of cloth, hunks of busted machinery, you name it. We're going to pile it by the air shaft at the west end. Anyone who doesn't know how to run a wagon?
No one raised a hand. The electric wagons were battery-driven contraptions, like miniature dump trucks. They developed a nauseating stink after continual use that reminded Hall of burning power lines.
Okay, Warwick said. We got the basement divided up into sections, and we'll be done by Thursday. Friday, we'll chain hoist the crap out. Questions?
There were none. Hall studied the foreman's face closely, and he had a sudden premonition of a strange thing coming. The idea pleased him. He did not like Warwick very much.
Fine, Warwick said. Let's get at it.
2 a.m., Tuesday. Hall was bushed and very tired of listening to Wisconski's steady patter of profane complaints. He wondered if it would do any good to belt Wisconski. He doubted it. He would probably just give Wisconski something else to bitch about. Hall had known it would be bad, but this was murder. For one thing, he hadn't anticipated the smell. The polluted stink of the river, mixed with the odor of decaying fabric, rotting masonry, vegetable matter. In the far corner where they had begun, Hall discovered a colony of huge white toadstools poking their way up through the shattered cement. His hands had come in contact with them as he pulled and yanked at a rusty gear-toothed wheel, and they felt curiously warm and bloated, like the flesh of a man afflicted with dropsy. The bulbs couldn't banish the 12-year darkness. It could only push it back a little and cast a sickly yellow glow over the whole mess. The place looked like the shattered nave of a desecrated church, With its high ceiling and mammoth discarded machinery that they would never be able to move, its wet walls overgrown with patches of yellow moss, and the atonal choir that was the water from the hoses, running in the half-clogged sewer network that eventually emptied into the river below the falls. And the rats! Huge ones that made those on Third look like dwarfs. God knew what they were eating down here. They were continually overturning boards and bags to reveal huge nests of shredded newspaper, watching with atavistic loathing as the pups fled into the cracks and crannies, their eyes huge and blind with the continuous darkness. "Let's stop for a smoke," Wisconski said. He sounded out of breath, but Hall had no idea why. He had been gold bricking all night. Still, it was about that time, and they were currently out of sight of everyone else. All right. He leaned against the edge of the electric wagon and lit up. "I never should have let Warwick talk me into this," Wisconski said dolefully. "This ain't work for a man. But he was mad the other night when he caught me in the crapper up on 4 with my pants up. Christ, was he mad!" Hall said nothing. He was thinking about Warwick and about the rats. Strange how the two things seemed tied together. The rats seemed to have forgotten all about men in their long stay under the mill. They were impudent and hardly afraid at all. One of them had sat up on its hind legs like a squirrel until Hall had gotten in kicking distance, and then it had launched itself at his boot, biting at the leather. Hundreds, maybe thousands. He wondered how many varieties of disease they were carrying around in this black sump hole. And Warwick, something about him. "I need the money," Wisconski said. "But Christ Jesus, buddy, this ain't no work for a man. Those rats." He looked around fearfully. "It almost seems like they think. You ever wonder how it'd be if we was little and they were big?" "Oh, shut up," Hall said. Wisconski looked at him, wounded. "Say, I'm sorry, buddy. It's just that—" He trailed off. "Jesus, this place stinks," he cried. "This ain't no kind of work for a man." A spider crawled off the edge of the wagon and scrambled up his arm. He brushed it off with a choked sound of disgust. "Come on," Hall said, snuffing his cigarette. "The faster, the quicker." "I suppose," Wisconski said miserably. "I suppose." 4 a.m., Tuesday. Lunchtime. Hall and Wisconski sat with 3 or 4 other men, eating their sandwiches with black hands that not even the industrial detergent could clean. Hall ate looking into the foreman's little glass office. Warwick was drinking coffee and eating cold hamburgers with great relish. "Ray Upson had to go home," Charlie Brochu said. "He puke?" someone asked. "I almost did." "Nah, Ray'd eat cow flop before he'd puke. Rat bit him." Hall looked up thoughtfully from his examination of Warwick. "Is that so?" he asked. "Yeah." Brochu, 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 shook his head. "I was teaming with him. God damnedest thing I ever saw. Jumped out of the hole in one of those old cloth bags. Must have been big as a cat. Grabbed onto his hand and started chewing." "Jesus," one of the men said, looking green. "Yeah," Brochu said. "Ray screamed just like a woman, and I ain't blaming him. He bled like a pig. Would that thing let go? No, sir. I had to belt it 3 or 4 times with a board before it would. Ray was just about crazy. He stomped it until it wasn't nothing but a mess of fur. Damnedest thing I ever saw. Warwick put a bandage on him and sent him home. Told him to go to the doctor tomorrow." "That was big of the bastard," somebody said. As if he had heard, Warwick got to his feet in his office, stretched, and then came to the door.
"Time we got back with it."
The men got to their feet slowly, eating up all the time they possibly could, stowing their dinner buckets, getting cold drinks, buying candy bars. Then they started down, heels clanking dispiritedly on the steel grillwork of the stair risers. Warwick passed Hall, clapping him on the shoulder.
"How's it going, college boy?"
He didn't wait for an answer. "Come on," Hall said patiently to Wisconski, who was tying his shoelace. They went downstairs. "7 a.m., Tuesday." Hall and Wisconski walked out together. It seemed to Hall that he had somehow inherited the fat Pole. Wisconski was almost comically dirty, his fat moon face smeared like that of a small boy who has just been thrashed by the town bully. There was none of the usual rough banter from the other men, the pulling of shirt tails, the cracks about who was keeping Tony's wife warm between the hours of 1 and 4. Nothing but silence and an occasional hawking sound as someone spat on the dirty floor. "You want a lift?" Wisconski asked him hesitantly. "Thanks." They didn't talk as they rode up Mill Street and crossed the bridge. They exchanged only a brief word when Wisconski dropped him off in front of the apartment. Hall went directly to the shower, still thinking about Warwick, trying to place whatever it was about Mr. Foreman that drew him, made him feel that somehow they had become tied together. He slept as soon as his head hit the pillow, but his sleep was broken and restless. He dreamed of rats. "1 a.m., Wednesday." It was better running the hoses. They couldn't go in until the crap crews had finished a section, and quite often they were done hosing before the next section was clear, which meant time for a cigarette. Hall worked the nozzle of one of the long hoses, and Wisconski pattered back and forth, unsnagging lengths of the hose, turning the water on and off, moving obstructions. Warwick was short-tempered because the work was proceeding slowly. They would never be done by Thursday, the way things were going. Now they were working on a helter-skelter jumble of 19th century office equipment that had been piled in one corner. Smashed roll-top desks, moldy ledgers, reams of invoices, chairs with broken seats, and it was rat heaven. Scores of them squeaked and ran through the dark and crazy passages of that honeycombed heap, and after 2 men were bitten, the others refused to work until Warwick sent someone upstairs to get heavy rubberized gloves, the kind usually reserved for the dye house crew, which had to work with acids. Hall and Wisconski were waiting to go in with their hoses when a sandy-haired bullneck named Carmichael began howling curses and backing away, slapping at his chest with his gloved hands. A huge rat with gray streaked fur and ugly, glaring eyes had bitten into his shirt and hung there, squeaking and kicking at Carmichael's belly with its back paws. Carmichael finally knocked it away with his fist, but there was a huge hole in his shirt, and a thin line of blood trickled from above one nipple. The anger faded from his face. He turned away and retched. Hall turned the hose on the rat, which was old and moving slowly, a snatch of Carmichael's shirt still caught in its jaws. The roaring pressure drove it backward against the wall, where it smashed limply. Warwick came over, an odd, strained smile on his lips. He clapped Hall on the shoulder.
"Damn sight better than throwing cans at the little bastards, huh, college boy?"
"Some little bastard," Wisconski said. "It was a foot long."
"Turn that hose over there."
Warwick pointed at the jumble of furniture.
"You guys, get out of the way."
"With pleasure," someone muttered. Carmichael charged up to Warwick, his face sick and twisted.
"I'm gonna have compensation for this. I'm gonna—"
"Sure," Warwick said, smiling.
"You got bit on the titty. Get out of the way before you get pasted down by this water."
Hall pointed the nozzle and let it go. It hit with a white explosion of spray, knocking over a desk and smashing 2 chairs to splinters. Rats ran everywhere, bigger than any Hall had ever seen. He could hear men crying out in disgust and horror as they fled, things with huge eyes and sleek, plump bodies. He caught a glimpse of one that looked as big as a healthy 6-week puppy. He kept on until he could see no more, then shut the nozzle down.
Okay, Warwick called. Let's pick it up.
I didn't hire out as no exterminator, Cy Ippiston called mutinously. Hall had tipped a few with him the week before. He was a young guy, wearing a smut-stained baseball cap and a t-shirt.
That you, Ippiston? Warwick asked genially.
Ippiston looked uncertain, but stepped forward. Yeah, I don't want no more of these rats. I hired to clean up, not to maybe get rabies or typhoid or something. Maybe you best count me out. There was a murmur of agreement from the others. Wisconski stole a look at Hall, but Hall was examining the nozzle of the hose he was holding. It had a bore like a .45, and could probably knock a man 20 feet.
You saying you want to punch your clock, Cy?
Thinking about it, Ippiston said. Warwick nodded.
Okay, you and anyone else that wants. But this ain't no unionized shop, and never has been. Punch out now, and you'll never punch back in. I'll see to it.
Aren't you some hot ticket? Hall muttered. Warwick swung around.
Did you say something, college boy?
Hall regarded him blandly. Just clearing my throat, Mr. Foreman. Warwick smiled.
Something taste bad to you?
Hall said nothing.
All right, let's pick it up,
Warwick bawled. They went back to work. (2 a.m. Thursday). Hall and Wisconski were working with the trucks again, picking up junk. The pile by the west air shaft had grown to amazing proportions, but they were still not half done. Happy 4th, Wisconski said when they stopped for a smoke. They were working near the north wall, far from the stairs. The light was extremely dim, and some trick of acoustics made the other men seem miles away. Thanks. Hall dragged on his smoke. Haven't seen many rats tonight. Nobody hears, Wisconski said. Maybe they got wise. They were standing at the end of a cozy, zigzagging alley formed by piles of old ledgers and invoices, moldy bags of cloth, and 2 huge flat looms of ancient vintage. Gah, Wisconski said, spitting. That Warwick. Where do you suppose all the rats got to? Hall asked, almost to himself. Not into the walls. He looked at the wet and crumbling masonry that surrounded the huge foundation stones. They'd drown. The river's saturated everything. Something black and flapping suddenly dive-bombed them. Wisconski screamed and put his hands over his head. A bat, Hall said, watching after it as Wisconski straightened up. A bat! A bat! Wisconski raved. What's a bat doing in the cellar? They're supposed to be in trees and under eaves and... It was a big one, Hall said softly. And what's a bat but a rat with wings? Jesus, Wisconski moaned. How did it... Get in? Maybe the same way the rats got out.
What's going on back there?
Warwick shouted from somewhere behind them.
Where are you?
Don't sweat it, Hall said softly. His eyes gleamed in the dark.
Was that you, college boy?
Warwick called. He sounded closer. It's okay, Hall yelled. I barked my shin. Warwick's short, barking laugh.
You want a Purple Heart?
Wisconski looked at Hall.
Why'd you say that?
Look. Hall knelt and lit a match. There was a square in the middle of the wet and crumbling cement. Tap it. Wisconski did.
It's wood.
Hall nodded. It's the top of a support. I've seen some other ones around here. There's another level under this part of the basement.
God.
Wisconski said with utter revulsion. "3:30 a.m., Thursday. They were in the northeast corner, Ipiston and Brochu behind them with one of the high-pressure hoses, when Hall stopped and pointed at the floor. There, I thought we'd come across it. There was a wooden trap door with a crusted iron ring bolt set near the center. He walked back to Ipiston and said, "Shut it off for a minute." When the hose was choked to a trickle, he raised his voice to a shout. "Hey! Hey, Warwick! Better come here for a minute." Warwick came splashing over, looking at Hall with that same hard smile in his eyes.
Your shoelace come untied, college boy?
"Look," Hall said. He kicked the trap door with his foot. "Subcellar."
So what? Warwick asked. This isn't break time,
"That's where your rats are," Hall said. "They're breeding down there. Wisconski and I even saw a bat earlier." Some of the other men had gathered round and were looking at the trap door.
I don't care, Warwick said. The job was the basement, not...
"You'll need about 20 exterminators, trained ones," Hall was saying. "Going to cost the management a pretty penny." "Too bad." Someone laughed.
Fat chance.
Warwick looked at Hall as if he were a bug under glass.
You're really a case, you are, he said, sounding fascinated. Do you think I give a good goddamn how many rats there are under there?
"I was at the library this afternoon and yesterday," Hall said. "Good thing you kept reminding me I was a college boy. I read the town zoning ordinances, Warwick. They were set up in 1911, before this mill got big enough to co-opt the zoning board. Know what I found?" Warwick's eyes were cold.
Take a walk, college boy. You're fired.
"I found out," Hall plowed on as if he hadn't heard, "I found out that there is a zoning law in Gates Falls about vermin. You spell that Vermin, in case you wondered. It means disease-carrying animals, such as bats, skunks, unlicensed dogs, and rats. Especially rats. Rats are mentioned 14 times in 2 paragraphs, Mr. Foreman. So you just keep in mind that the minute I punch out, I'm going straight to the town commissioner and tell him what the situation down here is." He paused, relishing Warwick's hate-congested face. "I think that between me, him, and the town committee, we can get an injunction slapped on this place. You're going to be shut down a lot longer than just Saturday, Mr. Foreman. And I got a good idea what your boss is going to say when he turns up. Hope your unemployment insurance is paid up, Warwick." Warwick's hands formed into claws.
You damn snot-nose, I oughta...
He looked down at the trap door, and suddenly his smile reappeared.
Consider yourself rehired, college boy.
"I thought you might see the light." Warwick nodded, the same strange grin on his face.
You're just so smart. I think maybe you ought to go down there, Hall, so we got somebody with a college education to give us an informed opinion. You and Wisconski.
"Not me!" Wisconski exclaimed. "Not me! Warwick looked at him.
You what?
Wisconski shut up. "Good," Hall said cheerfully. "We'll need 3 flashlights. I think I saw a whole rack of 6 battery jobs in the main office, didn't I?"
You want to take somebody else?
Warwick asked expansively.
Sure. Pick your man.
You, Hall said gently. The strange expression had come into his face again. After all, the management should be represented, don't you think? Just so Wisconsin and I don't see too many rats down there. Someone, it sounded like Ipiston, laughed loudly. Warwick looked at the men carefully. They studied the tips of their shoes. Finally, he pointed at Brochu. Brochu,
Go to the office and get 3 flashlights. Tell the watchman I said to let you in.
why'd you get me into this? Wisconsin moaned to Hall. You know I hate those. It wasn't me, Hall said, and looked at Warwick. Warwick looked back at him, and neither would drop his eyes. "4 a.m., Thursday. Brochu returned with the flashlights. He gave one to Hall, one to Wisconsin, one to Warwick.
Ipiston, give the hose to Wisconsin.
Ipiston did so. The nozzle trembled delicately between the Pole's hands.
All right,
Warwick said to Wisconsin.
You're in the middle. If there are rats, you let them have it.
Sure, Hall thought, and if there are rats, Warwick won't see them. And neither will Wisconsin after he finds an extra 10 in his pay envelope. Warwick pointed at 2 of the men.
Lift it.
One of them bent over the ring bolt and pulled. For a moment, Hall didn't think it was going to give. And then it yanked free with an odd, crunching snap. The other man put his fingers on the underside to help pull, then withdrew with a cry. His hands were crawling with huge and sightless beetles. With a convulsive grunt, the man on the ring bolt pulled the trap back and let it drop. The underside was black with an odd fungus that Hall had never seen before. The beetles dropped off into the darkness below or ran across the floor to be crushed. Look, Hall said. There was a rusty lock bolted on the underside, now broken.
But it shouldn't be underneath, Warwick said. It should be on top. Why?
Lots of reasons, Hall said. Maybe so nothing on this side could open it, at least when the lock was new. Maybe so nothing on that side could get up.
But who locked it?
Wisconsin asked. Ah, Hall said mockingly, looking at Warwick. A mystery. Listen, Brochu whispered.
Oh, God,
Wisconsin sobbed.
I ain't going down there.
It was a soft sound, almost expectant. The whisk and patter of thousands of paws, the squeaking of rats.
Could be frogs,
Warwick said. Hall laughed aloud. Warwick shone his light down. A sagging flight of wooden stairs led down to the black stones of the floor beneath. There was not a rat inside. There was not a rat in sight.
Those stairs won't hold us,
Warwick said.
Those stairs won't hold us,
Warwick said with finality. Brochu took 2 steps forward and jumped up and down on the first step. It creaked but showed no sign of giving way.
I didn't ask you to do that,
Warwick said. You weren't there when that rat bit Ray, Brochu said softly. Let's go, Hall said. Warwick took a last sardonic look around the circle of men, then walked to the edge with Hall. Wisconsin stepped reluctantly between them. They went down one at a time. Hall, then Wisconsin, then Warwick. Their flashlight beams played over the floor, which was twisted and heaved into 100 crazy hills and valleys. The hose thumped along behind Wisconsin like a clumsy serpent. When they got to the bottom, Warwick flashed his light around. It picked out a few rotting boxes, some barrels, little else. The seep from the river stood in puddles that came to ankle depth on their boots.
I don't hear them anymore, Wisconsin whispered. They walked slowly from the trapdoor, away from the trapdoor, their feet shuffling through the slime. Hall paused and shone his light on a huge wooden box with white letters on it. Elias Varney, he read. 1841. Was the mill here then? No, Warwick said. It wasn't built until 1897. What difference? Hall didn't answer. They walked forward again. The sub-cellar was longer than it should have been, it seemed. The stench was stronger, a smell of decay and rot and things buried. And still the only sound was the faint, cave-like drip of water. What's that? Hall asked, pointing his beam at a jut of concrete that protruded perhaps 2 feet into the cellar. Beyond it, the darkness continued, and it seemed to Hall that he could now hear sounds up there, curiously stealthy. Warwick peered at it. No, that can't be right. Outer wall of the mill, isn't it? And up ahead. I'm going back, Warwick said, suddenly turning around. Hall grabbed his neck roughly. Oh, whoops. I did it again. I'm going back, Warwick said, suddenly turning around. Hall grabbed his neck roughly. You're not going anywhere, Mr. Foreman. Warwick looked up at him, his grin cutting the darkness. You're crazy, college boy. Isn't that right? Crazy as a loon. You shouldn't push people, friend. Keep going. Wisconsin moaned. Hall! Give me that. Hall grabbed the hose. He let go of Warwick's neck and pointed the hose at his head. Wisconsin turned abruptly and crashed back toward the trapdoor. Hall did not even turn. After you, Mr. Foreman. Warwick stepped forward, walking under the place where the mill ended above them. Hall flashed his light about and felt a cold satisfaction. Premonition fulfilled. The rats had closed in around them, silent as death. Crowded in, rank on rank. Thousands of eyes looked greedily back at him. In ranks to the wall, some fully as high as a man's shin. Warwick saw them a moment later and came to a full stop. They're all around us, college boy. His voice was still calm, still in control, but it held a jagged edge. Yes, Hall said. Keep going. They walked forward, the hose dragging behind. Hall looked back once and saw the rats had closed the aisle behind them and were gnawing at the heavy canvas hosing. One looked up and almost seemed to grin at him before lowering his head again. He could see the bats now, too. They were roosting from the rough-hewn overheads, huge, the size of crows or rooks. Look, Warwick said, centering his beam about 5 feet ahead. A skull, green with mold, laughed up at them. Further on, Hall could see an ulna, one pelvic wing, part of a rib cage. Keep going, Hall said. He felt something bursting up inside him, something lunatic and dark with colors. You are going to break before I do, Mr. Foreman, so help me God. They walked past the bones. The rats were not crowding them. Their distances appeared constant. Up ahead, Hall saw one cross their path of travel. Shadows hid it, but he caught sight of a pink twitching tail as thick as a telephone cord. Up ahead, the flooring rose sharply, then dipped. Hall could hear a stealthy rustling sound, a big sound, something that perhaps no living man had ever seen. It occurred to Hall that he had perhaps been looking for something like this through all his days of crazy wandering. The rats were moving in, creeping on their bellies, forcing them forward. Look, Warwick said coldly. Hall saw. Something had happened to the rats back here, some hideous mutation that never could have survived under the eye of the sun. Nature would have forbidden it. But down here,
Nature had taken on another ghastly face. The rats were gigantic, some as high as 3 feet, but their rear legs were gone, and they were blind as moles, like their flying cousins. They dragged themselves forward with hideous eagerness. Warwick turned and faced Hall, the smile hanging on by brute willpower. Hall really had to admire him.
We can't go on, Hall. You must see that.
The rats have business with you, I think, Hall said. Warwick's control slipped.
Please, he said. Please.
Hall smiled. Keep going. Warwick was looking over his shoulder.
They're gnawing into the hose. When they get through it, we'll never get back.
I know. Keep going.
You're insane.
A rat ran across Warwick's shoe, and he screamed. Hall smiled and gestured with his light. They were all around, the closest of them less than a foot away now. Warwick began to walk again. They topped the miniature rise and looked down. Warwick reached it first, and Hall saw his face go white as paper. Spit ran down his chin.
Oh my God. Dear Jesus.
And he turned to run. Hall opened the nozzle of the hose, and the high-pressure rush of water struck Warwick squarely on the chest, knocking him back out of sight. There was a long scream that rose over the sounds of the water. Thrashing sounds.
Hall!
Grunts. A huge, tenebrous squeaking that seemed to fill the earth.
Hall, for God's sake!
A sudden, wet, ripping noise. Another scream, weaker. Something huge shifted and turned. Quite distinctly, Hall heard the wet snap that a fractured bone makes. A legless rat, guided by some bastard form of sonar, lunged against him, biting. Its body was flabby, warm. Almost absently, Hall turned the hose on it, knocking it away. The hose did not have quite so much pressure now. Hall walked to the brow of the wet hill and looked down. The rat filled the whole gully at the far end of that noxious tomb. It was a huge and pulsating gray, eyeless, totally without legs. When Hall's light struck it, it made a hideous mewling noise. Their queen, then, the Magna Mater. A huge and nameless thing whose progeny might someday develop wings. It seemed to dwarf what remained of Warwick, but that was probably just illusion. It was the shock of seeing a rat as big as a Holstein calf. "Goodbye, Warwick," Hall said. The rat crouched over Mr. Foreman jealously, ripping at one limp arm. Hall turned away and began to make his way back rapidly, halting the rats with his hose, which was growing less and less potent. Some of them got through and attacked his legs above the tops of his boots with biting lunges. One hung stubbornly on at his thigh, ripping at the cloth of his corduroy pants. Hall made a fist and smashed it aside. He was nearly 3/4 of the way back when the huge whirring filled the darkness. He looked up, and the gigantic flying form smashed into his face. The mutated bats had not lost their tails yet. It whipped around Hall's neck like in a loathsome coil and squeezed as the teeth sought the soft spot under his neck. It wriggled and flapped with its membranous wings, clutching the tatters of his shirt for purchase. Hall brought the nozzle of the hose up blindly and struck at its yielding body again and again. It fell away, and he trampled it beneath his feet, dimly aware that he was screaming. The rats ran in a flood over his feet, up his legs. He broke into a staggering run, shaking some off. The others bit at his belly, his chest. One ran up his shoulder and pressed its questing muzzle into the cup of his ear. He ran into the second bat. It roosted on his head for a moment, squealing, then ripped away a flap of Hall's scalp. He felt his body growing numb. His ears filled with the screech and yammer of many rats. He gave one last heave, stumbled over furry bodies, fell to his knees. He began to laugh, a high, screaming sound. 5 a.m. Thursday. Somebody better go down there, Brochu said tentatively. Not me, Wisconski whispered. Not me. No, not you, Jelly Belly, Ippiston said with contempt.
Well, let's go,
Brogan said, bringing up another hose.
Me, Ippiston, Dangerfield, Nadeau. Stevenson, go up to the office and get a few more lights.
Ippiston looked down into the darkness thoughtfully. Maybe they stopped for a smoke, he said. A few rats, what the hell? Stevenson came back with the lights. A few moments later, they started down. And that was Graveyard Shift by Stephen King.
Hoo boy!
Nice, horrifying stuff. Yes, a rat the size of a Holstein calf. That is a very large rat. Oh God, it is a very large rat. Better sick the mangler on it. Okay, so that is gonna do it for today. Oh, right on time too. Crunchy crunch. Hope you're enjoying these. So yeah, again, next week I'm gonna be doing. Oh wow, my brain just stopped. Next week I'm gonna be doing Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which will be fairly ambitious. Because it's a bit longer than. I should really find where I put that book actually. Than Blind Sight, and it is a bit of a bear. Where are you? Ah, there it is. Very good. Yoink. Um, it's like a good. It's like a good 100 pages longer, I think, or more. So it's going to take a few fair weeks to get through, but it is it is a pretty badass book. Like it's some people hold it up as the quintessential a number one. Read this first if you want to understand cyberpunk novel. There's a few others that I'd probably put ahead of it, but it is extremely entertaining. Um, and it's kind of goofy. It's very deliberately goofy. It has bits of humor interspersed, but it's kind of it's well crafted in the sense that it provides an incredibly stunning imagery, and then also manages to do some cool different stuff like, oh, here's some ideas for the future, and then also be immediately recognizable. So yeah, looking forward to that, although that's going to be a pretty long-term project. But yeah, hope you enjoyed today. I do streams like this every Saturday. I also do them at the same time, and I also do streams on Monday and Wednesday. On Mondays, I have a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something with giant robots or something that's mecha adjacent, with mechs or possibly powered armor or cyberpunky cool stuff. Futuristicy, fancy schmancy, have robots in it. And then on Wednesdays, I do a Warframe Wednesday stream where I do a couple hours of Warframe. All right, folks, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great rest of your week, and happy holidays and belated Thanksgiving and stuff. Have a good one.